jokes.
Somewhere between 11:59 and 12. Welcome to the September 30th City Council work session. We are all things transit and transportation today, right? And first up, we're going to have a discussion about the Beltline Highway. Kurt?
Yes, thank you. Sitting in for John Reese today. So the first work session is an update on the Beltline facility plan that I think you last were updated on a little over a year ago. So with us today are Franny Brindle from ODOT, Chris Henry, and Kurt Geider from Public Works Engineering, and we'll have Kurt Geider lead this conversation off.
Thank you. From your briefings recently with Envision Eugene and previous ones with the Transportation System Plan, I hope you, like me, feel that many streams are coming together and sort of merging in a river, and you're going to have new comprehensive plans altogether. So got an image that seems to symbolize that. We're here today to talk about two of these streams that are coming together. And actually, I know often the process might seem like this, meandering around, but from where we sit, it is kind of flood stage, everything coming together at once. Two of the streams are the Transportation System Plan, which will act like the transportation chapter of the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, and the Randy Pape Beltline Facility Plan. You received an update on the facility plan in July of 2014, and the facility plan came out with three potential options for improvements to the Beltline, and in addition to a no-build option, which is always there. And it was explained to you last year that the facility plan needed to be incorporated as part of the transportation system plan before the environmental review and the further refinement of the options takes place. And the environmental review would be through the National Environmental Policy Act, the NEPA process that the federal funding requires. And in the same time, so the facility plan has been sort of sitting there waiting for the transportation plan to catch up. Well, we're to the point it's caught up. Transportation plan is being packaged now, the draft, for broad public review, and will be brought to you roughly the same schedule as the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, so that they all merge. And we are preparing the draft transportation plan to include the Beltline facility plan, so we're here for the update. We wanted to have this touchstone with the council because the facility plan is being prepared in a manner that one of the three options will drop off for consideration. That option being what was called the collector-distributor option. And I'll do some explanations and from the transportation plan area, and then Chris can describe the three options in more detail following that. But by dropping the collector-distributor option of those three, would save time and money in both the plan preparations and eventual construction of the improvements. We feel the other two options better reflect the overall draft goals and policies that were coming out of the Transportation System Plan and Envision Eugene. And we also wanted to make sure we're all on the same page at this juncture so that when all the plans are coming in for adoption and public hearings, that this doesn't unnecessarily derail the transportation component of that. Also, having fewer options going forward can help ODOT prepare some of the interim work that they're doing, just because it narrows the options and allows more streamlined planning on their part. And Franny can talk to that in a little bit later. By coming to you months in advance of the Envision Eugene and Transportation System Plan, if this idea is causing more questions than we're able to answer, we have time to schedule some more work sessions and work through those in the meantime. So first, a little bit of background, how the facility plan and the transportation system plan kind of came together. For years, the Beltline facility, our existing facility, has been a concern in the public. We hear complaints, as have you, about safety The ramps are shorter than what current standards require quicker merging, which is dangerous. Congestion, we always hear about from the folks that use it, and the age of the structure was becoming a concern, and seismic safety and structural integrity and whatnot. So the facility plan process began in 2008 and ran through 2014 to explore possible solutions, look at the problems, and then propose solutions to that. The facility plan was developed with a substantial public input, and particularly there's a stakeholder committee that had many of the users of that facility and industry folks that rely on that facility, and a steering committee that had members of the City Council and the County Board of Commissioners helping steer that process. So that plan ended with the three alternatives. There's enhanced existing, an auxiliary lane, and the collector distributor, and as always, the no-build alternative will also go through for these. As I said, Chris will describe these in a moment. So while the facility plan was being developed, and as it started gelling what the issues were and possible solutions, the transportation system plan process started up. And as you recall, we had a large public advisory committee, the Transportation Community Resource Group, that evolved out of the Envision Eugene Community Resource Group, was formed to advise on that. So we were hearing from the transportation plan and several themes that this group really drove home, and those also included safety for all the traveling public, the need for improved access and mobility for pedestrians, bicycles, and transit users, generally reduced reliance on single occupancy vehicles for our basic daily trips. And there's always an acknowledgement of the importance of freight movement within the community also. So all these became informative for the Beltline discussion also. Now, from our discussions, as I mentioned, the two Beltline options that seem the most consistent with the policy direction that's now in the draft transportation system plan were the improve existing option and the auxiliary lane option. Those are the two options that add what's called a local arterial bridge, so a local street basically on a separate bridge that would connect Green Acres and the Crescent Avenue area on the east to Division on the west. And those are the two options I would say too, that when we've floated this list and the project descriptions out to the public, that sort of captures the public imagination the most, because people can say, oh, I could be on a bike or on a bus and get across the river without having to merge onto the Beltline facility. So that's seemed to have legs. The transportation system plan must include a list of projects that we expect could be funded and built within the 20-year planning horizon for that plan. So we've been developing that concurrently with the policy set for the transportation plan. And we created a placeholder to plug into the draft transportation system plan so that we could have cost estimates and kind of float the image of what type of improvements would go forward, and to use those improvements to test how traffic would flow 20 years from now. So we plug all this in the regional LCOG's transportation model and tell. So based on the consistency with the transportation system plan policies and what's increasingly a limited expectation on future funding for transportation projects, we created a placeholder that includes the new bridge, the local arterial bridge, and some ramp improvements to the older structure. And that's at a cost of estimated $83 million, not even including right-of-way costs. So that's been before the Transportation Community Resource Group, and it's been lightly floated out in the public, on our public webpage, for over a year now. And again, not very controversial, and some people are saying, oh, this has some great multimodal opportunities. So there are more reasons. They'll probably filter in with the other presentations, but listed in the staff report that you have that can outline in more detail some of the reasons why we're recommending limiting or dropping off the collector-distributor option at this time. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris, and he can go through a more detailed description of the options.
Thank you, Kurt. The Randy Pepe Beltline Facility Plan included 3 high-level design concepts. They're called Improve Existing, the Auxiliary Lane concept, and the Collector-Distributor Road concept. They each have some similarities and some differences. They have some opportunities and some challenges. When we look at the local arterial bridge over to the right, in the first 2 options, those are identical structures. They provide space for people driving cars, space for people walking, biking, and potentially transit service as well. Across the Willamette River on the main line, Randy Pepe Beltline, each of those alternatives would add an additional lane in each direction. So instead of a 2-lane road, it would be a 3-lane road or 6 lanes on the mainline Beltline. The collector, and we'll get into an overhead view here too, the differences between the 2 alternatives have to do with the interchange on the west end at River and Division Avenues, and Improve Existing keeps that interchange form the way that it is today. The auxiliary lane concept changes it to an overpass that we'll see in a coming slide. The collector-distributor alternative does not have that local arterial bridge, but instead has separate structures parallel to the mainline Beltline facility. It does add a lane in each direction and a collector-distributor road as well. So 2 lanes additional in each direction to the existing 4. So that's a total of 8 on the mainline Beltline. So this is an image of the Improve Existing concept. You can see that the River Avenue, Division Avenue underpass remains as it is. The other similarities between all of the concepts that Franny will touch on about some short-term improvements are changes to the Delta Beltline Highway interchange. The southeast quadrant loop ramp would go away and be replaced by a traffic signal for eastbound Beltline traffic to head north. That removes some of the weaving movements in a very high crash location that we see, well, weekly. There are crashes. So back to the changes. When we move to the auxiliary lane concept, what you'll see is that the River Avenue, Division Avenue underpass goes away and it becomes an overpass further west. That creates greater separation between the 2 interchanges and improves safety and operations of the facilities there. And again, you can see, it's a little hard to see in the yellow here, but this is the local arterial bridge that is consistent between those 2 design concepts. The local arterial bridge could be built separately or first, and it has independent utility, and that's a key word, that allows for traffic relief from the Beltline, the Randy Pepe Beltline Highway, and the connectivity that a lot of people are seeking, especially for people walking and biking, to be able to get across the river. As Kurt said, that high-level cost estimate without right-of-way is $83 million, and that's something that is in the draft transportation system plan for your future consideration. When we move to the collector-distributor concept, we do not have that local arterial bridge, and in order to satisfy that mobility need, we would have to build this entire project at once. And the cost estimate range is about $260 to $270 million, money that we do not have and we don't anticipate to have within the 20-year plan horizon. On the other hand, the $83 million to build that local arterial bridge is conceivable to obtain. So in short, part of the reasons for not carrying forward that collector-distributor option is that it's not feasible, that we can't build it in the short term. We would have to wait a long time in order to make any capacity improvements over the river. It doesn't provide the bicycle and pedestrian connectivity that the local arterial bridge would. although we could figure out how to attach that to the structure, but that level of detail hasn't been explored. It's much more expensive with a marginal capacity benefit. The other two alternatives give about 85 to perhaps 95% of the capacity that you would achieve with this collector-distributor alternative. And then again, it's unlikely to be funded within the 20-year plan horizon. More to say about the ODOT short-term plans.
Great, thank you, Chris. So thanks for having me. Again, I'm Franny Brindle. I'm with ODOT. I'm the Area 5 manager. So ODOT supports the removal of the collector-distributor from further study. This will do two things. One, it'll provide funding feasibility, as it's not likely that the area will come up with enough money to do all the improvements at one time. $200, $300 million funding package is unlikely. And second, it will save time and money to get to the locally preferred alternative in the NEPA process. I'll explain that further in a minute, but let me explain how we're anticipating getting funding for improvements. The 2015 legislative session, the one that just passed, included a bill that amended the 2009 Jobs and Transportation Act bill, and as you recall, that bill is what funded the Beltline I-5 interchange improvements, which we've had 4 phases of. The last phase is going to be in construction next year. It allowed any remaining funds from the Beltline I-5 interchange to be used on the improvements to the west in Beltline. So we were very fortunate that that occurred. So now it's important because we have actual funding to begin some design elements on the Beltline corridor. The Beltline facility plans, the 3 alternatives that were forwarded, all showed similar improvements, as Chris mentioned, to the Beltline Delta interchange. Because of this, and because the Beltline I-5 interchange Phase 4 will have some cost savings, ODOT is able to move $6.5 million from the Beltline 4 and use it for the preliminary engineering phase for the Beltline Delta interchange. These interchange improvements will be needed regardless of what the final preferred alternative comes out in the NEPA process. And we should know in February, when we have the bid coming in for that last phase of the work, how much money we'll actually have. It's conceivable that we will have enough money for construction because it's anticipated that the Beltline Delta interchange improvements will run about $15 million. If that's the case and we have enough money, we can begin construction on that interchange as soon as 2017. So while the Beltline Delta interchange design phase proceeds, ODOT will be working through the process of getting to the locally preferred alternative from the options presented in the Beltline facility plan. And that's once the TSP is adopted, that is. If we remove the collector-distributor, ODOT will be able to focus on the improved existing and the auxiliary lane options as the 2 alternatives to move forward, both of which contain the local arterial bridge. The process of getting to the locally preferred alternative includes a thorough environmental analysis, including environmental justice, property impacts, Endangered Species Act, etc. ODOT would like to move forward with the improvements on the Beltline facility plans because, if for no other reason, we see that the bridges that carry the Beltline over the Willamette are in desperate need of repair and seismic upgrades. ODOT has identified currently about $19 million worth of repairs needed on that bridge currently to bring it to standard. But that won't include capacity increasing at all. That would just repair the bridge as it exists, the 2 bridges, in fact. Removing the collector-distributor will provide ODOT with more certainty about future bridge improvements needed. And the sooner that ODOT can begin scoping and estimating those repairs and replacements for the Beltline, the sooner we can inform a public funding discussion with the state legislature and a possible funding package in the future. In conclusion, ODOT has the funding to begin design on the Beltline Delta interchange, which will provide operational improvements, improve safety, and add slight capacity to that interchange as we will have ramp extensions. Secondly, we have a contract that will soon be in place to begin the design services and the environmental work and public involvement. And once we get to build alternative of the of the remaining two alternatives, we can begin putting together funding packages for improvements in a phased approach. Thank you.
Glad you're here today. Thank you. Ready to have some conversation?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask, I know that it's Mike and Claire who've been serving, right? And Claire has already asked to be in the queue, but I'll ask you.
Mike has to be in the queue.
Okay. Oh,
For a change.
I'll ask both of you.
Okay.
I'd like to
And
get
Alan.
you too.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay. I just wanted to ask a simple question. In all the discussion, have you taken into consideration our climate and energy goals?
Yes.
Okay.
From the beginning, the Transportation Community Resource Group agreed on the general the thrust of the sustainability efforts, and agreed that climate change and our need to mitigate were important. So we had that kind of wind behind our backs in proceeding with this. There were some caveats. They said, well, before it's all packaged, before you go too far, we kind of want to see what the balance is. But we integrated a triple bottom line analysis through the whole kind of decision-making and winnowing of projects through that. That said, the target that's in the Climate Recovery Ordinance of the 50% reduction of fossil fuel use came in to our process kind of later than that and sets a more stringent target than what we might be able to achieve with our package now. We're finding it difficult to we don't think we can accurately predict how the TSP, the Transportation System Plan projects will play out with the fossil fuel. And again, that's only one slice of the whole fossil fuel use pie. But for a variety of reasons, and I know the Sustainability Commission, for one, has kind of questioned what type of improvements, if any, we should be doing for Beltline. Because of the need for upgrade for that facility anyway, and to better, or the best way to facilitate not only, or help alleviate projected congestion and accommodate bikes, peds, and transit. That's why we feel the two projects with the additional bridge seem to be the best solution. I will say, packaging the Transportation System Plan, this will be a spoiler alert for when I'm back with that plan. The next 20 years are going to be so hard to predict what technologies are available, what type of vehicles, if any, people will be driving, what the gasoline supplies will be. You know, every time we set on a path, we get new info. You know, we were recently briefed on how much more rapidly self-driving electric vehicles may be coming online. So the Transportation System Plan, it's actually a fairly progressive strategy and the package of all the improvements, and I think we'll be monitoring quite closely. So as the money's being gathered for these large projects, we'll be building lots of small ones, and we'll be reassessing as we go. It's a long answer to your question.
It is, and I agree with how challenging this all is, but I think if we have as part of our planning that we're going to look at these things carefully and try to push in the direction that we intend to push in, that can guide how we go about doing our business. And I think that's, I don't know how it's shown in the plans, but I think that intentionality needs to be evident because, as you well know, you will come and go and we will come and go, and those things will happen over time. So intentionality will mean a lot about how we stay in the same direction we say we want to go.
I believe the intentions will be very clear in the draft Transportation System Plan.
Good. Okay. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. This serving on this gives me, and this decision gives me a little bit of pause, along the lines of what Chris is regularly fond of saying, that you can have it fast, cheap, or right, pick any two. I've had the chance to serve on the steering committee for this since just a few months after it started in '08, and we've seen since the beginning 5 separate plans and the no-build option. We eliminated over the course of time the very most expensive that would do the most good to address what at least people in the neighborhood of the facility feel is most critical, which is capacity and safety. We eliminated the first one for the sake of expense. We eliminated the second one for the sake of expense and complexity, and now we're down to the third one. The challenge that it poses for me is that I agree. We add a good deal of time to the solution, the more complex the answer that we're going to adopt. And we can put the other options into play much, much sooner, which will be very helpful. But at the same time, I was one of those people who was pretty upset when we spent a lot of time and money and effort to rebuild the Ferry Street Bridge. And from a layperson's perspective at the time, it didn't seem like there was much enhancement to capacity there. It was still just as crowded. And my concern, not a fear, mind you, but a concern, is that we will spend a lot of time and money and effort to not increase capacity, or to not maintain capacity. Right now, it is absolutely, by ODOT standards, a failing facility. It is overcrowded, and the congestion creates a good deal of the safety problems. People have died there because it's crowded and used. And from a democratic standpoint, people are voting to use it, and they're not voting to use it less every day. So making sure capacity is enhanced is important. I recognize the value of a quick solution better than waiting for one, but I also have to look at this and say this facility is located in a state legislative district led by the current Ways and Means chair, in a congressional district led by the chair of the Transportation Committee in Congress. So if there was ever a time when we could do a significant fix with the authority and presence to be able to get the money we need to do it, the time is now. So I'm not exactly sure that I'm 100% on board with going with the smaller option, but I understand the wisdom of it. I'm still pausing, I suppose. Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question before I call on Claire? Doesn't it say in here with several of those options that if they're put in place, you will be at 70% capacity? Is that what it says in there?
There were some rather robust assumptions made about increases in people walking, biking, and riding the bus. And even with those, and I don't remember them in the amount of detail that you might want, there was still unmet demand on the Randy Pape Beltline. And the solutions don't meet all of that demand, even with the collector-distributor facility.
Clarification. Claire?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the update, and I just want to acknowledge being kept in the loop as this has been going forward, and I do appreciate that. I have a, not surprisingly, slightly different perspective from Councillor Clark. I think the two options, the improve existing and the arterial, are two good, viable options that will potentially bring relief a lot sooner for folks in that area than trying to see if we can get funding for something that it not only is more expensive but has a lot more complicated issues around it. When we're trying to make significant structural changes to a roadway that's in an already developed part of town, as we know with even the MX, which in some ways is a much less ambitious project than what we're talking about with the Beltline, even though it covers more miles. That leads to a lot of need to take right-of-way and negotiate with local property owners, and I think the complications start to outweigh the potential benefit if in fact you don't see that benefit for perhaps 25 or 30 years. That's not going to be satisfying for the folks who live out there right now. And I also want to just add from personal experience, as a former LA resident, you can't build your way into a congestion-free road. It's just has been proven time and time again that adding more lanes does not reduce congestion. In fact, can make it worse. And there are studies that back up that statement. I think these two viable options here would bring relief sooner than trying to go for that third, more complicated option. And while they might not bring the same level of relief that I think Councillor Clark is right. There were some options out there that would, in the mind's eye of the public, bring them the relief they're seeking potentially, but doesn't make any sense to wait for something we may never be able to do, and then that relief would not happen anyway. So I think I'm inclined to go for the more pragmatic approach of it may not be the pie in the sky thing that we all would like to envision, but it gets us a lot of the things that we need to improve that part of Beltline and the surrounding connectivity for the community. I think that's very important that we're thinking about how locally people can get across that river without having to get on the highway.
Alan?
Yeah, thanks for the update, and welcome, Franny. And I really appreciate all the work that you all have done and the public engagement that you have all done in doing this. And having grown up in California and visiting Southern California in particular, but Northern California as well, often for work, I agree with Claire's statement, you can't build your way out of congestion. It's also extremely expensive. All these options are extremely expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars. And even just to fix the broken parts. And funding is really tight. I don't think we're actually going to be able to even afford the lowest cost option here. We've seen this trend of cutting the most expensive one, then the next most expensive one, and that's kind of disturbing if you're looking at this project, or if you're the project manager. So I would prefer for us to make sure that when we do this, to get it phased in, and we do the fixes first and any of the enhancements second, and we can debate what a fix is. But is the phasing in of either the improve and auxiliary, is that phasing in that manner? Is that doable?
Yes, the local arterial bridge has independent utility, as well as the shorter-term improvements to the Delta Beltline interchange. So each of those can be built as separate phases.
So as we get money, we can do that, and then we can get money for the next part and do that.
Thanks to our partners at ODOT, hopefully, yes.
Right. Yeah,
And we'll probably be contributing as well in that financial solution.
Right, and the thing about the feasibility of the Delta Beltline and then the local arterial, they can be looked at as a standalone project. That means NEPA can be done as a standalone project, and both of those projects, according to Federal Highway, would stand with a categorical exclusion. Not that we would shortchange the public involvement process by any means, but we would do less of an environmental document, which can save millions, actually.
Yeah,
I've seen environmental assessments and impact statements cost quite a bit of money. So we can hopefully shorten that process.
Good. What's the timeline for the repairs on the Beltline-Willamette Bridge? And does the $19 million include the seismic issues?
The $19 million included some seismic, but my understanding is it's not 100%. They can do the best they can. The problem with the existing bridges over the Willamette are the decks themselves cannot be any thicker. They can't just put a thicker deck over because the girders won't support it. So they have to do a deck replacement. And then the seismic would be some kind of strapping together of the bridges, from what I understand. I'm not a bridge engineer. It doesn't get us all we need. What we really, in my view, and also the bridge design team would agree, we need new bridges over the Willamette. It's time.
So do you know when? But I heard within 10 years.
We need them as soon as possible. So what we're doing is we had $19 million set aside for the 150% list for the bridge prez, but we're saying that we would rather see these bridges replaced. So my understanding from my bosses is they're holding that money back to see if we can get additional funding to actually replace the bridges rather than just repair
So
them.
they're going to be replaced anyway.
Yeah.
Is that bridge in the earthquake preparedness stuff that we heard Murney Dow talk about in the assessment that we're doing of all our bridges?
I would
I don't
imagine it
know.
would be. But I haven't seen,
Kurt?
I'm sure that it is.
yeah.
Yeah, good. I'm fine with eliminating the collector-distributor option. It's the worst bang for the buck. I think the other options are better bang for the buck. Highest cost by $45 million, can't be phased in, which I think is necessary given our declining revenues and the limitations we have on funding. And there's no local route for bike, ped, or transit included in that option. So getting it off the table is just fine with me. I have one more comment about, I'm concerned about the integration of transit into this plan and the work. Monday, we were told that the Beltline MX was in a different process, which I think should be this process, and yet there's no mention of transit in this hardly at all, and in the write-up, and nothing shown on the maps for transit routes, and there's not even buses on the cross sections to show that. And I think we need to figure out how to integrate MX and transit into this corridor. And I used to think that having it be in the Beltline footprint was the way to go, but that's probably most expensive and least friendly to people using it. And maybe having it use cutting across North Eugene and using streets and other new things like the auxiliary bridge probably be a better option. So cutting across, can you talk about that and how that would get integrated? I'll need another round.
Well, the need for east-west transit improvements is certainly not off our radar. We would continue to participate with ODOT through this National Environmental Policy Act process if a project is developed. Well, we would have to go through that process, as Franny mentioned, as a documented categorical exclusion for the local arterial bridge. And we would make sure that the functionality or the space is available. There's a center lane here that could be used for transit. The bridge could be wider, it could be narrower, just whatever our needs are, and we'll look at those options in more detail as necessary. Is it MX? Don't know. Is it increased local service, connectivity that doesn't currently exist? Maybe, but we'll have to explore that.
Okay.
Chris?
Just get me for round two.
Thank you. I really appreciate the work you've done. I think it's very thoughtful, very deliberate. You're trying to do the best job you can. I understand you're balancing a variety of different considerations. And I think for me what it boils down to is there is what we should do. And I think a lot of people here have already indicated, you yourself know what we probably should do there. But that's balanced with what we can do there. And there's a variety of constraints on that, both physical and financial. But there's actually a third level, which is what will we do? And for me, that's the focus, because all the people in this community are less interested in what we should do and what we can do. They really want to know what we will do. And so that's why I'm really appreciative of your saying, I think within this budget, there is money to actually do something. And if we need to do it incrementally and we need to do it in phases and we need to do what from a practical standpoint we would do, that for me is what's important, because I think it's great to tell people we should do this and then you never do anything about it. We've been talking about what we should do for years. What I appreciate is when someone comes in and sits down at this table and says, this is what we will do. That to me is important, because I think that's actually delivering something to the community that's more than just promises. And I like the fact that you're working to try to figure out what are those things that are within the realm of possibility that we can actually do. So I would say go full steam ahead. If there are solutions that have the money, the resources, and the ability to put into play, then I would very much appreciate you saying, we will do this, and let me know when we will do that, because you'll have whatever help I can afford you in getting it done.
Great. We're going to go to round two now. Got Alan and Mike and Claire in the queue. Alan.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said, but I didn't hear you say transit will be integrated into this plan. Will it be integrated? Without it being integrated, I'm going to be really challenged to support it.
Let me say real quick that ODOT is now an intermodal facility. We are not just a highway division anymore, and intermodal is very much important for any kind of alternatives as we look forward. We have to integrate transportation options in all our improvements. And this, we promised LTD that we will engage with them and plan with them the future improvements on the Beltline.
So will that take place in the next round and NEPA would cover that?
Right.
But it would be
Yes.
in the next more detailed round of...
It'll be in the design considerations and the NEPA analysis, correct?
That would, of course, require us to figure out if it's going to be in the footprint or parallel to it.
Right.
Right. The City of Eugene is in a stronger partnership than ever with Lane Transit District in the moving ahead process.
Yeah.
And yet, we can't necessarily speak for Lane Transit District and some of their programming decisions. So it's hard for me to absolutely say transit will be integrated here, but it is part of our transportation solution for our community, and I believe that we will. So I believe we will be including transit here, but I can't say what form. I can't say is that going to be MX service or if it's going to be local bus service, because we haven't gotten into the detail of what makes the most sense in that pragmatic approach that was mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Putting a bus in the cross sections would be helpful.
I'm a project manager for moving ahead with the city.
Right.
I've been the city's representative for the Randy Pape Beltline Facility Plan, and I will continue in this next phase of work. And so I'll be there, and I'll keep my eyes on that need to provide mobility for people riding the bus, and promise that I'll do my best to make sure that we meet those needs.
Yeah, good. Next question for Kurt. Sustainability Commission had a briefing on the scenario planning and the TSP, and appreciated that they're coming and talking about. But what the conclusion that we came to was that the TSP is not consistent with the Climate Recovery Ordinance requirement that we meet of 50% reduction of fossil fuel use by a community by 2030. And more specifically, it only has about half the number of trips in it by bike, ped, and transit than are necessary to meet that goal or thereabouts. And I don't see how this plan integrates into that, and I don't see how it then it's even more inconsistent with the CRO. So I don't believe we should bring back a TSP that's inconsistent with the Climate Recovery Ordinance. I think we should have one that meets the goals that we've set in ordinance and law. And I will clearly be a no vote on a TSP if a TSP is brought back that's inconsistent with the goals that we put into law through the Climate Recovery Ordinance. And I'll encourage my other councilors to vote with me. So I believe it's doable. So what does it take to get this plan and the rest of the TSB to be consistent with the Climate Recovery Ordinance? Yes, no question.
Yeah, well, you're correct. And there's some caveats in there about how things are measured and whatnot. But the indications are with the measuring tools that were developed for the scenario planning process, which was a regional plan. The indications were if we continue with our draft transportation system plan and Springfield's and all that, the region would fail to meet the Climate Recovery Ordinance targets. The draft transportation system plan has goals integrated in there, both the goal from the Climate Recovery Ordinance and the goal of doubling the mode share for walking, biking, and transit. So to meet and if all that is accurate, when translated from greenhouse gas reduction to fossil fuel reduction and from a regional perspective to the city, and if the Green Step model that was developed for scenario planning is accurate, even what's a rather aggressive goal of doubling the trips not made in cars will fail to meet the target.
Right.
So I would suggest maybe some work sessions, kind of offline, out of the TSP to explore that and how the council would like the transportation plan to be stronger. Can also be that some of the solutions towards meeting the Climate Recovery Ordinance are not what's typically included in a transportation system plan. There's funding, there's fees, there's charging, and so those can be explored so that we know what the total package of improvements would be.
A lot of arrows in the quiver to meet that goal, but the TSP is a real important one, and I would really appreciate if we could have those work sessions and talk about that goal and how, in particular, our TSP, before it gets brought to us, how it can be brought up to be consistent with the climate recovery ordinance.
So before I call on Mike, I would just say that's a conversation that you will have to start with either a conversation with the manager and me about putting it in future work session timing, or go through the polling process that we usually go through. But I encourage you to take it from you or anybody at the table who wants to take it from that end.
Okay, I'll follow up on
And
that.
I'd also say that part of the issues we face, and I think that's what he was talking about, is we're not alone in this planning process. So we can meet as high goals as we can meet, but the rest of the job is probably over in MPC or somewhere where we have to be working with our partners to try to do our best to bring them along and in with this work. So that's something else, that responsibility we have to try to meet. And the other thing that I wanted to say about what Franny said is, yes, the ODOT does have multimodal transportation at their, and so does OTC. And so I think there's sort of a circular pressure here that can happen about how we look at transit as a part of our economic development in the state, which is indeed a goal of OTC and the Oregon Transportation Department too. And so how do we use what they want to happen to leverage making sure that we're able to do what we'd like to do at this end with transit? So there's a sort of a circular thing here that I think we could all help each other get to where we want to go. Say that. Mike, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. To Alan's point and question about transit, I would say, I think to a certain extent it's up to LTD. They have been, however, at all of the steering committee meetings at the table with us. So they've been a part of the process all along and have been working on this in terms of planning appropriately with staff and ODOT. And I guess I would say the other issue that's important here is for us to maybe even talk further at some other time about what pragmatic actually looks like for all of us. Because I agree with Chris that it's what we can and will do that we need to land on. For me, pragmatic and common sense means not spending, $90 million if that fix doesn't actually solve the problem. Now, agreed, no one believes we're going to build our way out of congestion. But we don't just have congestion on this facility and in the surrounding areas. It's one of the reasons I was in support of the collector-distributor idea, is because some of the other surrounding streets got addressed that need it. I live just a few blocks off of Crescent, which if you follow it all the way from Coburg to the facility here becomes Green Acres. At 5 o'clock, that line, that mile plus from one end to the other, takes a half an hour to get from one end to the other. And it's not just a little congested. People die at that intersection and have. When I first started on council, it's one of the reasons I wanted to be a part of this, because I used to carry around a picture of a little baby who died from a rear end accident right a couple of blocks from my house where the on-ramp at Good Pasture is. It's not just a congestion problem. It's a fairly large-scale failed facility because of its lack of capacity and because of the surrounding roads' lack of capacity to address what people need in the area. So I understand and appreciate that we need to do the thing we can do and the thing we can do most quickly. I get that. But I have strong concern that we not just do something because we can that doesn't actually have, we spend tens of millions of dollars and everybody goes, you didn't do anything. So I think we need to have a more robust conversation about what pragmatic looks like.
I just suggest there may be some reason placed right in between those two visions.
Agreed.
Pragmatic. Yes, Claire.
So I just had a question and then
Gotta close that.
point out a possible typo in the attachments. My question was the term categorical exclusion was used twice in this conversation, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know what that's referring to. Can one of you explain?
Sure. Is my...
No. Why don't you try, Kurt?
It is.
batteries go bad.
Oh, maybe that's, hello, can you hear me? Okay.
There we go.
So the National Environmental Policy Act requires that we do public involvement, look at all the environmental impacts. If the environmental impacts are at less than a certain amount, it can be categorized as a categorical exclusion, that you don't have to write an environmental assessment or an impact statement. You still have to do the environmental analysis and the public involvement, but it's categorized as less onerous as far as documentation, and so that's what that means.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And then in our AIS on the mobility improvements for the auxiliary lane and improve existing, under the improve existing, it says would carry 17,000 vehicles on an average day, and then for the auxiliary lane, it said would carry 16,000 vehicles on an average day, and I'm not sure if that's a typo, or since I thought they were essentially the same in terms of their carrying capacity. So I don't, if you know that those are correct numbers, that's fine. If it's a typo, you could fix it in the future.
I don't know if they're correct or incorrect, but the difference is relatively small.
Sure. But if their capacity is the same, the number should be the same.
I would think that the auxiliary lane option would be a slightly higher capacity, and I'm not finding that exact reference that you're mentioning. Oh, here it is. That's referring to the arterial bridge, so it's not the main line.
Oh, okay.
Randy Pape Beltline. So it has to do partially with how the local arterial bridge connects to the existing system, and
that makes sense.
Yeah, some are more free-flowing than others. It's a small difference.
Thank you.
But we can take a look at that before, because that was an excerpt from the draft facility plan, so we'll make sure it's correct before it's included in the transportation system plan.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to wrap this one up because we have another work session coming after this. So thank you very, very much. You got what you needed in terms of information.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is the work session on transportation safety, Vision Zero, and the Mayor's Challenge for Safer People, Safer Streets.
Yes, so just by way of brief introduction on this, Vision Zero isn't something that's been in front of you before formally. It's a transportation safety strategy being embraced or adopted by a number of cities across the country, with ultimately a goal of zero transportation-related deaths or serious injuries on the surface transportation network. You heard some input on this at the public forum on Monday evening. The local interest group is spearheaded by a coalition known as Better Eugene Springfield Transit, or BEST, and to talk to you more about this today is Rob Interfeld.
Good afternoon, Mayor Piercy, members of the City Council. So I'm here to talk to you about two things that are very integrally related. I'll start with the Mayor's Challenge, and the Mayor's Challenge it's called the Mayor's Challenge for Safer People and Safer Streets, and it was launched by Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox, who's the head of the U.S. Department of Transportation, about 8 to 12 months ago, and it started this March, and it goes till next March, and it really focuses on safety for people who walk and bike, because they're more vulnerable users of our roadways, and they tend to be overrepresented in fatalities on our roadway system. Participating in the Mayor's Challenge requires a public statement about the city's commitment to making roads safe, convenient, and accessible for all users, and with the emphasis on the more vulnerable roadway users. And the provided resolution would accomplish this. And the Mayor's Challenge calls for cities to take action to improve walking and biking in one or more of the 7 challenge activity categories. So the agenda item summary lists out the 7 different categories and what we're doing in each of them. And those are just examples. There's certainly more that we're doing around transportation safety as a city. I thought I would just touch on a few of those right now to highlight. One category is called Fix Barriers. The city recently completed an Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan, which calls for bringing over 12,000 curb ramps up to national standards. And that includes installing around 350 new curb ramps every year through 2021. towards reaching that goal. Another category is gather data, and the Central Lane MPO has a very robust bicycle counting program. They have a set of portable bike counters that they move around to different bicycle facilities in the metropolitan area on a seasonal basis. And it really helps give them an understanding of how frequently are people biking, how do things change from year to year, from season to season. And then as we build new bicycle facilities in Eugene, we're adding permanent bike counters to those facilities. So for example, several years ago we installed one on the Fern Ridge Path when we rehabilitated a section of the path west of Chambers Street. When we build a new bridge over the Amazon Creek in West Eugene near Target. Next year, we're going to add a counter. When we rehabilitate the South Bank Path by the Knickerbocker Bridge, we're going to add a counter. And these permanent counters give us even more data because you're gathering counts every single day. So it really helps us get a good understanding of how are we doing. You heard in the previous work session that we have these goals in the draft TSP of doubling biking trips, and these counters really give us a sense of how are we doing towards reaching our goals. Another category is called Design Right. And we have a very robust pavement preservation program here in Eugene. When we repave streets, it's really a great opportunity to go in and make the streets safer. And there's lots of examples of projects in the past that we've done, like Bailey Hill Road, Alder Street, where we've made changes to the design of the street to make the street safer. But every year we look at every single pavement preservation project and look at what are some smaller things we can do too. So some of these in more recent years have included things like buffering bike lanes to create more separation from people biking and traffic, and street crossing improvements like the rectangular rapid flashing beacons that we've been installing around Eugene. Another category is called Create Networks. The draft TSP incorporates the pedestrian and bicycle master plan that was approved by the City Council in 2012, which will serve as a blueprint for building a robust pedestrian and bicycle network in Eugene over the next 20 years. Some of the key projects in the master plan are already funded, and just to give you some examples, these include that new bridge I mentioned earlier that was funded through Connect Oregon that will connect the Fern Ridge Path to that business district that has the Target and Walmart in, and then also to the terminus of the West Eugene MX. There's another project called the Jessen Path that will be constructed probably in 2017 that will create an over 1 mile long new shared use path on the south side of Golden Gardens Park, so on the west side at Ohio Street, all the way to the Beltline shared use path. The Active Amazon Transportation Corridor will create a new two-way protected bikeway on East Amazon Drive from Snell all the way up to Hilliard. It'll have 3 new pedestrian and bicycle bridges connecting over Amazon Creek, connecting East and West Amazon Drive, and it'll also extend the existing Amazon shared use path that runs along Hilliard south all the way to from like around 33rd or 34th where it ends now, all the way to the southern end of Tubman Park around 37th or 38th Avenues. Then the last project that I'll mention is Northeast Livable Streets. This will build the network of bicycle boulevards called for in the master plan on the other side of the river in most of the neighborhoods over there. So in the Harlow, Cal Young, and Northeast neighborhoods, they'll also implement a bunch of pedestrian crossing improvements in those neighborhoods. Since ODOT is here with us, I'll also mention they're doing a lot of good things in Eugene too in terms of building out our network. They're building a new shared use path along Highway 99 that is really key to our network from Roosevelt down to 7th Avenue. And as part of the I-5 Beltline project, they're extending the shared use path they built on the west side of Beltline all the way up to Chad Drive near the VA, and then south down to Garden Way. So there's really a lot going on in terms of building out our network. Lastly, the last category is educate and enforce. One great thing that happened last year is the police department conducted a crosswalk enforcement event, which is really a great way to educate the public about crosswalk laws. And we received an Oregon Health Authority grant to conduct an education campaign targeted to drivers, educating them about crosswalk laws that we'll be launching later this year. That's all I have to say about the Mayor's Challenge, just that we have this resolution. There's a lot that we're doing around on these topics, and then we plan to continue working on. So now I'd like to pivot to talking about Vision Zero. And I think, as you're aware, a lot of the reason why we're talking about Vision Zero here today is because there have been people and groups in the community that have been requesting that the city take this on as part of our transportation policy and just our approach to working on transportation issues and making our city safer. As Kurt said, Vision Zero is an approach to safety that sets a goal of 0 fatalities and serious injuries on our surface transportation system. It was started in 1997 when the Swedish Parliament adopted it as its official roadway policy. It spread to a lot of cities in Europe, and they've demonstrated a lot of results in terms of lowering the rates of fatalities and serious injuries. And in the United States, it's been adopted by a bunch of different cities, mostly larger cities, and in particular Seattle and Portland in the Pacific Northwest. In terms of how many people are dying in our system here in Eugene, we average around 6 people dying in crashes on our roadway system in Eugene. And I think that's through 2012. I think we had 3 in 2013. I don't have more recent data. The Central Lane MPO has a great web tool that we use, and that shows the locations of all the crashes on our roadway system in Lane County. But we definitely have progress to make in order to reach a goal of Vision Zero, if that's what the council decides to set. The draft transportation system plan has a policy that says, consider safety first when making decisions. Strive for zero transportation-related fatalities by reducing the number and severity of crashes through design, operations, maintenance, and enforcement. So there are some elements to both the resolution and the draft TSP that are consistent with Vision Zero. I wouldn't say that either of them is totally kind of fully embracing Vision Zero or implementing it. A couple of key tenets of Vision Zero are to reduce traffic speeds both through design and enforcement, and to physically separate vulnerable roadway users from motor vehicle traffic where the speeds are higher. And one of the reasons for this is if you're walking and you get hit by a vehicle that's going 20 miles an hour, you're much more likely to survive than if you get hit by a vehicle going 30. So even though it's only 10 miles an hour difference, it really is a huge difference in terms of your likelihood of survival, or just in terms of how life-changing that injury will be to you. So that's all I have to
We'll open it up for
I
discussion.
look forward to your discussion.
Okay. It's on my mind because we were just talking about it at lunchtime about the sidewalk infrastructure and the role it plays in safety and multimodal transportation too. And I know I had a person in my office this morning who is a wheelchair user, and their difficulty in navigating our sidewalks with I know we're trying to plant trees that don't have as many things in them that are obstacles on this, don't cause your sidewalks to lift up. But I think we have to kind of take this on more seriously and not leave it to when people are deciding they want to spend the money as a neighborhood to fix your sidewalk. I think there are basic safety, mobility issues that can be very hazardous. They might not cause somebody to die, but they certainly can cause people to suffer some serious injuries. And I think we need to take that on more. I got Betty and Claire in the queue. Betty?
Thank you. I would hope that we would be thinking about nobody hit by cars, not just killed. Mm-hmm. I knew last year 3 people who were hit by vehicles downtown, and I know it happens all over. And I think if we do adopt a resolution, I hope that we take steps to implement it. Some things that I think would help would be, I don't know whether we could do it or not, but if we didn't allow right turn on red, that's when a lot of people get hit by cars. They're making a right turn, they look around to see, is there a car coming, but they don't look for pedestrians. Stop signs, I hope we'll get the stop sign that Duncan Rhodes wants out by the school sometime. He's been asking for it for a long time now. And I think stop signs can help. They give the pedestrian a chance. Speed limits you just mentioned speed limits. They're way too high for safety. And also, something I've noticed in other cities is that you have more time to walk across the street where there is a light. It shouldn't change to red so fast that one would have to run across. You mentioned Seattle. Seattle has always had, in spite of the fact it's a large city, they've always been kinder to pedestrians. In my experience, I was there in 48, I was there in the 60s, I was there recently, and I thought it would have changed as the city's gotten bigger, but they've stopped for pedestrians. And I think that's a matter of enforcement and changing attitudes and people realizing that you don't hit people. That is, so I have asked in the past, I don't know how long in the past now, I've been here so long, but for a citywide study of traffic. I think it's every once in a while we hear of one neighborhood that says we have real problems with traffic. I think it's citywide, and I would like to see something, maybe starting with the Neighborhood Leaders Council where all the neighborhoods are represented, but a study of what's wrong all over and ideas of how to improve. One idea I heard once, which I thought was really some city was doing, was, I'm not watching the time, that's why my head keeps moving. Some city they would take a picture of someone who's speeding and get their license number and send them a letter and say, you were speeding on this street where Emily and Sally are best friends and live across from each other. And there are 14 other kids in this block who sometimes don't think before they cross the street. And that can be effective in helping someone to be careful. Thank you.
Before I call on Claire, I just want to, I don't think we said this, but there is a suggested motion for Resolution 5138 here, and we've also received some information for a more detailed resolution, so you may be wanting to respond to that as we go around and hear from you. Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Rob, for the presentation and for the information in our packet. Clearly there is a need to pay greater attention to making our streets safer for all users. Just these past couple of weeks, we've had folks petitioning us to reduce the speed on River Road, add the stop sign that Betty just mentioned. And I completely agree that many areas of our community are seeking safer streets for all users, that this is a citywide issue, and I think it should be a city council effort to address it in a comprehensive way. So I do really appreciate the start that staff has made here with what you've provided in our council packet. We have residents who cannot fully participate in our community life right now because of a lack of infrastructure and a justifiable fear of physical injury if they try to walk or bike in certain places, walk to transit. And we, as a council, I think, hear from those folks on a semi-regular basis, and some folks have just given up and don't complain to us about it. So this isn't okay, and I would really like to see this council adopt the goal of Vision Zero as a resolution, and adopt a resolution that would affirm our commitment to safe streets that serve all users equitably and empower staff, both in the Public Works Department and Public Safety, to implement programs and projects that has those goals front and center. So while I think the resolution in the packet could be a good place to start, I don't think it quite gives us what I'm looking for. And I really like the version that was provided by BEST, but I also understand, although I could offer a motion to substitute that one for what's in our packet, I don't necessarily think that's the best way to go, because I don't think we'll have time today to have a good, robust discussion as a council and really discuss the implications of that resolution. So what I'd like to suggest is that we ask staff to take the draft resolution that BEST offered us and look at it, make sure it can work for us in terms of legal and other factors for how our city operates, and bring it back for another work session for the council to consider. Before I end my statement, though, one of the things I really liked about this was talking about people walking and biking as opposed to talking about cars and bikes. So that's just a phrasing thing, but for me it's meaningful that we're talking about how we move people around our city as opposed to how we move vehicles around our city.
Alan?
Yeah, just back on the previous topic about Beltline, when I was talking about fixes, I was talking about safety fixes that make that be safe for folks, and I appreciate people that have lost their lives in that intersection. It is one of the least safe, top 10 least safe places in the whole state, I understand, that intersection at Beltline and Delta Highway. On this topic, I also support the Vision Zero and its goal of no needless deaths on our streets. I note in the AIS that Sweden adopted this nearly 20 years ago as their national transportation or policy. So good for them. Go Sweden, and being part Swedish, I'm quite proud of that. To get to the desired results of zero deaths, you first need the vision, and then you need the plan. So setting the vision is really the job of the council and the mayor, and developing the policy is really the job of the staff and interested community members. So I'm interested in kind of moving it in that direction. I appreciate the resolution in the AIS, but I don't think it goes far enough either. I would like to explore adopting Vision Zero as our transportation and policy, and learning what it means, and figuring out what changes we would need to do to what we're already doing, and what new things we'd need to do in order to make that a reality. I think the modifications that Bess provided for us are more in line with what I was thinking, but having just gotten them, I'm not really prepared to move on that. But a resolution that adopts Vision Zero after we've learned about it more and what it means, so a resolution that adopts it as a policy and sets up a framework of how we would figure out what we would need to do is more along the lines of what I would think we'd need to do. So I'm in favor of a work session or two on this to get us more educated, and then move it into adopting it as a policy and setting up some framework to move forward with it.
Mike?
I get to say I agree with both Claire and Alan that I think this needs to come back to us. For me, though, it's subtly different. Of course, I'm in favor of the goals. Of course, who isn't? Safer streets for all of their users in all of the ways people use them is a fantastic goal, and the more we can do, the better. The interesting thing for me, I was just mentioning to Rob the other night, was that a lot of people talk about public safety being a government's #1 job, but that doesn't often have anything to do with police officers for a lot of people. For a lot of folks, public safety means being able to get across the darn street. So, of course this is important, and of course our goals are that way. The challenge is, I think Alan pointed out, although I see it a little differently, I'm not sure we always adopt policies that actually make our streets safer. I think sometimes inadvertently, with good intention, we adopt policies that make our streets more dangerous. I think, and not to rehash the subject, but I think South Willamette is a perfect example of that. Everybody knows you're supposed to ride a bicycle in a bike path on the right-hand side of the road with traffic. I wonder how many of my colleagues have ever seen somebody riding in a bike lane in the wrong direction, because I sure have. Well, I almost hit somebody the other day doing that, because I came out of a driveway and there was a guy riding his bike the wrong direction in the bike lane, and I didn't look fast enough to my right as he's coming at me, and I nearly pulled right in front of him and clipped him. On Willamette Street, there are more entry points, driveways, and side streets per block than any other place in our city. And I think we've actually made it a great deal more dangerous by increasing the number of bicycles we see on that particular road with that particular number of access points. I think we would have been wiser to put a bicycle thoroughfare, much like Alder, on an adjoining street. It would have been safer for people who travel that way, and it would have enhanced their capacity to travel. So when we get to the policies that support the idea of safer roads, I'd like to see us having a more thorough conversation about what is actually safer, because sometimes it's not the choices we've made so far, in my opinion. Thank you.
I would just say, of course, we know this from sitting around the table. We have different opinions. But But I'd also say that is when we're called to rely on evidence of what best practices in other places to guide our thinking. And then I wanted to ask you a question about moving forward here. You, because I don't want to assume, because a few people have said that they are want to have further discussion on Vision Zero, that we've made a decision. So I get from those who do support it that they want to have further discussion, and they want to put some more detail in it, and they want to understand it better and understand what it means better. But I think the clarity for staff has to be, is this what you want to pick up and take forward? So I don't know if you want some sort of general motion that says something to the effect of what you said about supporting the concept of Vision Zero and asking staff to look at this and come back and have a discussion with us about it.
So you have a couple options, and I heard a couple things talked about. We can have you make a motion that directs the city manager to bring back, to work with BEST and bring back a revised resolution. You could have a motion that directs staff to do additional research and explore the Vision Zero goal and come back with that information. So you have a couple different options there, and I can help you make whichever motion you
Don't want to do is have us leave here and then somebody come back at a future meeting and say, well, we never agreed to pursue this anyway. So that's all I'm asking for you to have some clarity, not to. I didn't hear anybody say let's move on this resolution as it's currently written. So I totally understand that, George.
Well, and based on what I just heard, I mean, why not combine both those ideas into one? I mean, I definitely support the goals of Vision Zero. I mean, back in the late 70s, I was on a traffic enforcement team called RIDE, and it was reduce injury and death through enforcement. You know, you got to look at engineering, education, and enforcement when you're talking about something like this. I would suggest that you go see if there are any other cities that have a similar resolution, what they've done, incorporate some of the things on the recommended resolution from BEST, because there are a couple of things in there that I disagree with that are in there, and also try to just rework it on their own and then come back to us at a later time.
Mike, did you want to add anything before I go to Claire?
I wanted to say that there were a couple other points I wanted to make and ran out of time there with another round. However, I would say that to get at the solution you're throwing there, I had a motion, and the idea being that, I don't know if it's in line or out of line for me to make the motion based on the way you just called on me, so I'm a little confused. But is it in line to make a motion at this time?
Claire's crafted one.
Because
I think Claire's going to make a motion. I don't know if you could make a motion.
I was just going to move to direct the city manager to come back to us with a future work session to discuss the most appropriate way to adopt Vision Zero as a goal for our community. In other words, I'm trying to give it the idea that we like the idea. It's just the contents and the pieces. We want to form the one that works for all of us, but we all kind of agree that that's an end goal we want to get to.
That's a motion.
Yes.
Did you get that motion?
I know that was badly stated. I apologize.
Yes.
You could do it more clearly.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Alan?
Is it a goal or a policy?
Well, now that's the point, the specifics of the resolution, I suppose. That's where we need to have a more robust discussion, and that's the point. Come back, have a more robust discussion about the points so that we can get to the goal that
If by that you meant, or if you take it as a friendly goal and or policy, then I
Yes.
support it.
I think she's working on wording, right? Are you?
I'm trying, yeah.
So it's what I had written was a little more detailed. My motion would have been to direct the city manager to work with BEST to draft a proposed resolution on Vision Zero for council consideration and provide council with additional information about the implications of adopting such a policy. So it's similar in
And that's
thrust.
very close to what I had
Okay.
kind of come up with.
So you can talk to Mike and see if he's got a motion on the table.
I didn't hear a substantive difference from my motion. I'd accept a friendly if
Work
you
with
have
best
one.
part.
It was
More detailed.
It actually sounded like a
Hers
motion.
sounded better.
You could take hers as a
You know, I'm actually pretty good off the cuff, 99 out of 100 times. That was the one.
Would you accept that as a friendly?
I will accept all differences between my motion and Claire's as a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Is
You
yours
got it
now,
now?
motion?
Are we know what we're voting on?
I can show you my language.
Yours is a
Yes,
motion now,
we're
right?
good. And the second's okay with the friendly?
I'll second
Oh,
hers.
That was me.
Okay.
And I want to wish best of luck to the minutes recorder trying to interpret this.
She's got hers written down. So.
All right.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. None in opposition. It passes. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.